Hello, I'm Maker of Beauty, and this is my class on how to put the paper flower together once you have your petals printed out using the 𝐒𝐭𝐤. So let's start. The tools that you'll need are hot glue gun. It's right here. You'll need scissors, and then I have a whole bunch of different things that I use for curling my petals. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Whatever you have in your house will probably do just fine. I have used pens, pencils. I even have used, glue sticks, which you will need to glue the petals. And then, of course, there is an 𝐋𝐞𝐭'𝐬 knife. I'm sorry, not the 𝐋𝐿, I forget how this knife is called. Any case, so this is also a good tool for curling your petals. And then you will obviously need your petals. So these petals right here that I have been made using different shapes in 𝐒𝐭𝐤, well, in Design Space. So let's see. Right here, what you're looking at, let me just do it this way. This is petal number 3. This is petal number 2. And this is petal number 1. Today we're going to be working with petal number 2. But all of the advice and suggestions that I make and how I layer my flowers, it's pretty applicable to all of them. And I will specify in my templates, right, which steps to follow. Because there are many different ways of what you can do with your petal in order to get the unique look in a well put together flower at the end of it. So I'm going to set this 2 petals aside, and we're just going to work with number 2. In my class, I have talked about, in my class for how to set up the project in Design Space to cut your petals, I talk about how I use the large size and I petal, and I treated both as my large size and my medium. And what I mean by that is this: typically for the flower, right, for most of flowers, you will need 6 petals, 3 layers each. So let's count. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? This is your first layer, and there's your second layer, and this would be your small layer. And if I was to do the, like large, medium, and small different size, I would reduce it by 0.5 inches. So this would be, say, 5 inches, this would be 4.5, and this would be 4 inches, right? So between the smallest to the largest and 1 whole inch. So what I found is that, because my reduction between the large and the medium is not that drastic, if I have a lot of flowers that I'm making, it can get very confusing for me, because the small and the medium are almost the same. So when I collect them together, to stack them up before I start putting everything together, it was just a little bit too much. And the general dimensions of my petal are such that they allow me to not have medium petal in a different size. I can just take the large petal and use that for the medium layer. So hopefully that makes sense to you, and the logic behind why I don't bother to cut out medium petal for some of my flowers. Let me stress it out, that is the case for some, not all of them. Next, let's talk about the type of the paper. So ideally, you want to use something that is at least 65 weight. The reason to that is that anything below that, the flower is just going to be floppy. I've tried, to drop down to like 45, and there is some construction, I think, paper. It's just not the same. And if you are making a flower for like a backdrop, and you're going to be, taking it from one space to another space, it just gets very easily ruined. It doesn't maintain its shape very well. It's floppy. It doesn't look so well put together. So 65 is a good rule. Michaels has an excellent paper by Reflections. I highly recommend it. They have a beautiful metallic options also by the Reflections, and typically it's pretty expensive, but about 2 to 3 times a year they have a really good sale. It's where it drops to like 20 cents for 12 by 12 sheet. Good deal. Now for my base though, I recommend that is at least 100. And the reason to that is having a strong base, right, just helps with keeping your flower straight. And it just makes it so much easier to have a strong back, to put it, say, for example, on a wall, right? Or, you know, if you're using it a backdrop and you're going to be using a Velcro, right, it has more room, more sturdiness to work with. In some of the cases, if you're going to be making like a really big flower that is 22 inches or even more than that, I would say take the cake cartons, right, and use that as your back, because that will just give you so much more durability and stability. With regard to my base, right, I typically set my base to be the same as my largest petal, although that's not the case here, and there's a good reason to that, right? The reason to that here is because the base of my petal is pretty thin compared to the top of it, right? And so going down with reduction of the base by 1 inch is okay in this case. And a lot of these things, right, will come to you intuitively as you make more and more flowers. You'll just be able to see with your eyes, you know, whether like this size will go with that height and so on and so forth. But initially, right, the good thing probably to do is to finish gluing all of your petals and not commit to like any specific base size, but print out several of them, right? Say your large petal is 5 inches, have a base that is 5 inches, right? Have one that is circle and have another one that is 1, 2, 3. This is actually not the right one, but have the one that has like 6 angles, so it helps you with the spacing. You know, don't just follow the directions blindly and think that it's going to come out just beautiful on your first try. Many times when people sell the petals and they give you recommendations on the sizes and portions, right, like the eyes been very, very trained, and they can, even if the proportions are off, they'll be able to work with it and the end product is still going to be just great. But if you're just starting out, you don't really have that much of a practice, so don't limit yourself. You know, it's like give yourself a couple of options. You know, put the flower first, at least the first layer before you glue it on, see whether or not it looks good, and then start to gluing it on. And with that said, even if you glued something on but you didn't like it, this paper is very sturdy. You can literally, you know, take it off and re-glue it again. I've done it many times where I had to fix my flower. Now let's talk about the slits. As you can see, all of my petals already have a slit in them, right? So I do take that extra step of grabbing the score line, converting to cut line, and attaching it to my petal so that the cut is there already for me. And the reason I do that is, one, is it saves time, two, it also puts it in perfectly. Like if I didn't have it here and I had to do it by hand, you know, I mean, I don't always get the straight line. So just save myself time by putting it there right away. The thing about the slit, right, is that you don't want to have a small slit. And I see that mistake many times. Like I can tell you that this slit is very, very small. The reason to why you do not want to have a small slit is that when you have a small slit and you put your petal together, glue it, what ends up happening is it lifts your petal high up, right? And that causes several things. One is that the whole look is just not going to look the best unless you have a petal where you want to have it high, but that's very rarely the case. Most of the petals, most of the flowers are very much open. And the way you get that open is by having higher slit. Let me demonstrate what I mean, right? Here we have a petal with the small slit, and I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to give it higher. I'm just going to hold both of them. Okay. Do you see the difference, right? That one of them is just so much higher relative to the other. This one just opens up so much better. Let me move this out of the way so maybe you'll see it a little bit better. It lays much better. It opened much more. You know, it doesn't have this like a big huge gap. And you know, say if you end up with doing, you know, like a high petal, with what I call like a high rise, right? By itself, it'll look good. But say like if you need a backdrop and you've done all your calculations and you've calculated this to be like, you know, you need it to be 10 inches and then your slit is very small, that will rob you of a couple of inches. And considering that you're going to have, you know, like 1 inch lost from one side and another inch lost from the other side, instead of you know, having like 10-inch petal, 10-inch flower, you end up with 8 inches. And you know, that can easily throw all of your calculations off. But then also when you have something like this high, right, and you put another flower next to it because you're trying to have like a nice composition, there's a lot of empty space in between the two of them that's going to be so much harder for you to fill it in, versus, you know, it's like when you have it like an open and it's pretty flat, it just doesn't have as much of the space open there. Any case, without any further ado, let's go ahead and glue some of the petals together. So I will already cut the slits on this one. I did the slit on this one, and just need to finish it up on this. To save myself on time, I put several of them together. And I'm just gonna go a little bit further up. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. Okay. And now I'm gonna start gluing my petals. So you just do a little bit of a dab right here. Glue it on. And leave it. I need a glue stick soon. The key with when you glue, right, is you don't need that much of a glue. You need a good amount, but make sure that you press it really, really, really hard. Sometimes when I make my roses, what I actually end up doing is I take a stick and I use that to press it really hard, especially if I'm working with the metallic paper, because metallic paper can be a bit difficult to adhere. Now let's talk about the hot glue guns. You know, I see people like promoting all kind of different guns. The truth of the matter is the high temperature is the best, and at the end of it, you know, after heavy use, all of them will get messy. I don't spend, you know, like $100 on a glue gun. I use pretty simple ones. It costs $15. It works just as well. At some point, you know, it dies on me and then I just go and buy a new one. But I'll get like at least good life. I mean, a good year of life out of it. Okay, so I'm done with my large that is really medium petal. And now I'm gonna show you how I layer it. And again, you know, as you are just learning how to put the flower together, you know, don't just start gluing. Position it first, you know, see how it looks, and then start to glue. But I typically use the circles because that helps me with keeping everything in the center, but everybody's different, so you do you, as I say. So it would go something like this. The first two petals would go the opposite of each other. And then the other two would go right about here. And the remaining two will come on this side. Now notice I did not curl any of these petals up. That is not to say that you cannot do it. You certainly can. Oh, with regard to how far to put it in, right? It's really up to you. I mean, the more you put it in here, the more sturdier, you know, your petal will be when it all puts together and then you lift it up. Don't do it, you know, something that like this close to the inch in order to get your size bigger. You know, if you wanted to make it bigger, then do it right off the bat where the petal itself is longer, but don't try to compromise the sturdiness of the flower by, you know, skimming out on a real estate space when it's time for you to start putting it together. So make sure this is covered pretty good with the glue. Press it down and hold it in one place. Sometimes I will use this, you know, if it's burning my fingers, and I'll press it down this way. Where you put in your first petal does not make a difference, nor do you really need to worry about, you know, like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a little bit of a glue right there. And then your second petal, I got stuck a little bit to my table, it will go directly opposite of that. And you know, at this point none of that is precise, so just try to recreate exactly the same thing with your opposite petal in order to have that harmonious, even look, you know, from both of them. So this one is in. I need to put another hot glue stick inside. Okay, now it's time for me to put my two other petals. And you know, guys, like, a lot of times I'll be watching videos, right, and people just make it so easy. I can tell you, a lot of stuff is not easy. When you watch the YouTube videos and they move everything so fast and everything looks so neat and clean, it is so not the case in real life. So don't get sold by thinking that, oh my gosh, you know, my glue is dripping, what is going on? It's happening to all of us, you know. It just, movies get edited, everything is made look very, very pretty. It's like Instagram pretty, but real life is not pretty. We all know that, although it can be. So another thing is to remember, right, that I see people do it very often. They'll start, you know, gluing the petals, and then when they put in the subsequent petals, they start to like go all the way towards the middle. You don't want to do that. You want to stay even and across all of your petals, right? If this is our first petal, right? Like, if this is how far you had put it in, don't all of a sudden put this one all the way down below where it drops a good inch lower than your first petal, right? You need to glue it relative to that as well, right? So essentially you'll have like another circle in here. If it helps you, right, what you could do, and I'm going to try to demonstrate it right now, on your first try, right? If you have a hard time, like, you know, keeping the proportions and whatever, just have, I don't know, like something here. I have this, right? Like, put something in the middle in here as another circle to help you to keep your proportions in place, so you don't all of a sudden end up, you know, gluing the petals at a different distance from one another. And you know, I just happen to have this styrofoam ball, and that's what I grabbed. But what you could do is just, you know, you could print out, you could cut out several different shapes of the circles, and just probably different colors, so it helps you a little bit, and just use that as a way to guide you. And at some point, as you have more experience, things will start coming together. Nope. Okay. So I'm gonna actually grab this and just press it down to make sure that it really adheres very well. Okay. Okay, so I have my, what I call first layer, right? And your first layer will always be your biggest petal. Say, for example, if you're going for something that is 22 inches, right, you will probably have anywhere between 5 to maybe even 6 layers. You know, I mean, you certainly would, the 23-inch petal with 3 layers would not look good. And so you would have your extra, extra large, large, medium, and small. So your extra, extra, extra large would be the very first one that you put it in, and then you put the smaller sizes, you know, in as you closing it in. So here is my still large size petal, and I'll be putting it in right between the two. Now, because it's going in here, right, it essentially does what the medium size petal would have done for me. It reduces the distance or the size between like the large petal and the medium layer by 0.5 inches. Actually, like, it's even a little bit more than that, which is quite acceptable to me. And by the way, I just noticed that the slit on this one is not as deep as the rest of it, and so this one is thinning it out a little bit more. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to adjust it. I'm going to grab one of my tools. I have a knife or maybe a small scissors, and I'm going to try to cut it out. I am a bit of a perfectionist, you know, things like this do drive me crazy, and the paper is very forgiving, and I'm just going to give it a little bit bigger and try to see if I'm gonna make it to go a little bit. Okay, well, this is as good as it gets at this point. Okay. Okay. So you put this between the petals now, right? Make sure that it is dropping below this two, that it's not on the same height. And this part goes a little bit faster. Now, if you had a petal where the base of it, right, and by base I mean this, in this point, was pretty thick, you would not be able to have a large petal act as your medium petal. The reason to that is because there would be so much overlap. No matter how big you would make this base, right, it would still be not enough real estate space, and your flower would be absolutely crooked. So that only works with some of the petals, not all of them. Okay. So we have our large, and then large that is really medium in place. I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to finish it up with my small petals. Now with the small petals, right, if you wanted them to be slightly different actually, because now, you know, it's going here in the middle, you could leave this, you know, pretty high up, and it would be, you know, it's a standing out by itself pretty high up. Like at this point you can get away with it, right? Or if you wanted to like still like lay pretty flat, then you would just increase it, the slit. I'm going to let it stay pretty high up, so I'm going to quickly finish gluing my petals. Oh, and to continue the conversation about the hot glue guns, you know, the people who like recommend the high-end ones, they all at one point at a time or another have posted saying like, oh gee, you know, I had an accident and I burned my fingers. And it's just part of the trade. It is what it is. I will say though, the type of the glue sticks that you buy does make a difference. So Gorillas are really good, and it doesn't matter where you buy it. You know, Walmart sells them, Michaels sells them. I mean, you know, the what is it? The Home Depot sells them. That's kind of like everywhere. But and there is only one brand from Michaels, that is Michaels brand, I don't remember the name of it, that also does a really good job. And the rest of them, the flower just will fall apart, especially with the roses, which tend to be very bulky and very heavy. Okay, so our small petal is gonna come, let's see. So we have a little bit of a space right here. I mean, not much because the base of it is pretty small, but still enough to be able to slide this petal in if we need to. And we're just gonna keep on going. And by the way, this specific arrangement, right, with the 3 layers and 6 petals, or even 5 layers, you know, and 6 petals, it's pretty much the same everywhere, right? You have your first layer, and then the subsequent just keeps going between the petals, and you alternate it. The small, you know, like say you have extra large and then large, and medium and small, right? Your large would go between the extra large, and then your medium would go between the large, and so on and so forth. And that's why, you know, giving yourself enough real estate space is so important, because if you start again, right, like making that mistake of where you get closer to the putting in your smaller petals, right, and you start to like closing it in too much, it just doesn't have a nice, well put look together at the end. And I am 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, 6. Okay, so it doesn't look like that. I will need to close it in, maybe just a little bit. So I'm gonna tuck it in this way. Okay. The tuck it in is so much better than overlaying it. It just gives it like, you know, a nicer look. But I know that I'm going to be using a little bit more glue to make my flower a little bit more sturdier. So like, for example, you know, it's like I feel like this flapping like a little bit too much. So all you really do is just, you know, you kind of go like behind this seam and just lift it gently, you know, give it a dab of a glue, put it in. You know, I'm not going to go in there with a finger, because, you know, like I will probably mess up the paper. So I'm just gonna go with a stick. It comes very handy, that regard, and that, you know, like makes it just much stronger. So maybe do the same thing here. You kind of like just lift the flower and you know, give it I don't know, like a flop, right, and see if it's like flopping, you know, too much anywhere. So the reason I do that is because I found that if I secure my flowers that way, then it holds out so much better. I do like a lot of backdrops for my friends, so I transport the flowers a lot, you know, back and forth, and that will get floppy. I mean, like, yes, paper is pretty sturdy, and yes, you can do a lot with it, you know, but there is a limit. And so if you just secure it where it's not flopping as much, it's you're gonna have like a much more longevity out of it. And then of course, you know, if you decide that you want to make the flowers that you're going to be, you know, like selling for people for the composition, you definitely want to make sure that you sell, you know, like you have something sturdy, because you figured that even with all the shipping and stuff, you know, there will be like some shaking and a handling of it that, you know, could potentially damage it slightly, or just affect, like, you know, its sturdiness. So if you secure it, which is what exactly, you know, I mean, which is what you basically do it, you will be a better quality of a product. Make sure you don't glue the petals, you know, to each other, because that's not what you want to do. You just want to make sure that it, on a base, it's, you know, stronger. So I'm just going to do it in a couple of places, but not too much. And, you know, definitely don't do it here. Like, go into the base on the bottom as much as you can. Okay, now for the centers, in my video on how to set up the petals in a design space to, you know, before you send them through your Cricut, I talked about that I don't waste any real estate space, right? So I end up like a lot of with my layered flowers, and so I use my layered flowers as my centers, and I can show you that I always like have a whole bunch of them laying around. So I'm going to grab this one, and I'm gonna put it right in here. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna grab the existing one, and then I'm gonna make its own separate video on how I curl my layered petals. And for this one, so you want to put it in exactly in the middle, and I'm not gonna put it in my fingers. I'm just gonna go in with this and press it down really hard. Sometimes what I will do, I will press, you know, down with this stick, and then I'll go in with my chopstick, whichever way at the end, you know, and like press it like a little bit more. The reason to that is, you know, the hot glue hardens pretty quickly, and you know, when you layer it, it kind of like ends up like a little bit gloppy. And if you don't press it down to spread it, you'll just have like this one big glob, and it can be hard to hide it. You know, it's like you can see it from like a side. If you have it, you know, like flat, then it's absolutely like so much better. And here you have your first flower. And actually, you know what, I just realized that I don't like how floppy this is, so I'm going to glue that down a little bit right here, just a tad. Okay, so, and there's the a flower that was created 100% using the different shapes at the design space. The medium size petal is really the large size petal, but you wouldn't be able to tell. And it's a very good size, right? Let's grab the measuring tape, if I can remember where I put it. And there's my toolbox right here. Okay. And so let's take it from one end to another. And it is a 12-inch, so it's definitely, well, actually, I think we need to go, no, it's still, well, 12.5 now. So, what I want to say about this one is that I did not do any curling, right? Because this video is really for, this assumes that you have no experience with paper flowers. I want to make it as easy as possible without confusing you, you know, too much. But I will definitely make a video where I will show you a couple different things that you can do with regards to curling these petals, which will give you a different look flower. And so this is to say that when, you know, whether you create your own petal or if you purchase it from from someone else, you know, I certainly hope you purchased my class and learned how to make it. Shamelessly self-promoting myself. You know, you can have one petal, but you can do so many different things with it, you know, so don't limit yourself. Start with basics, start with simple stuff, and then, you know, slowly work yourself up to doing more fun stuff and activities. And with that said, this concludes my video. If you have any questions, please send me an email to learnmakebeauty@gmail.com. I have a Facebook presence, I have an Instagram presence. If you don't have my petals, but you've utilized my techniques to put the paper flower, if you could tag me and give me recognition, I would certainly appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time to watch this. All the best. Enjoy making paper flowers.